On the errand of a friend who was writing to me from the East, I went to pay a visit to that charming young and old chatterbox, Simon Wheeler. I went to ask for news of a friend of my friend, Leonidas W. Smiley, and this is the result. I have a vague suspicion that Leonidas W. Smiley is nothing more than a myth, that my friend never met him, and that mentioning him to Simon Wheeler was reason enough for him to remember Bloody Jim Smiley, and bore me to death with some anecdote unbearable of that character with such a long, tiring, and uninteresting story. If that was my friend's intention, he succeeded. I found Simon Wheeler drowsy and comfortably ensconced near the fireplace on the bench in a dilapidated old tavern in the middle of the old El Angel mining camp. I observed that he was fat and bald, and that he had on his face an expression of sweet sympathy and naive simplicity. He woke up and greeted me. I told him that one of my friends had commissioned me to make some inquiries about a dear boyhood companion named Leonidas W. Smiley, the Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, a young evangelical minister, who had resided for some time in the country of El Angel. I added that if he could give me information on this Leonidas W. Smiley, I would be very grateful. Simon Wheeler took me to a corner, blocked my way with his chair, sat down, and then enveloped me with the following monotonous story. During the story he did not smile once, nor did he raise his eyebrows once, nor did he change his intonation, and until the end he maintained the same uniform sing-song with which he had begun his first sentence. Not once did he show the slightest enthusiasm. But his interminable recitation was shot through with a flow of impressive earnest sincerity. I had no doubt that he saw nothing ridiculous or funny in this story. He considered it, in fact, as an important event, and he judged its two protagonists with admiration, as intelligent men who demonstrated their ingenuity. So I let him speak without interrupting him once. Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley. The priest. I remember perfectly. There used to be a rogue named Jim Smiley in this place. It was the winter of 1849 or perhaps the spring of 1850. I don't remember exactly, but what makes me think it was about that time is that the great river barrier was not finished when he came to the field. I will always say that a more particular man has never been seen. He made bets on anything, for anything, as long as he could find someone. Everything that could serve as a reason for betting for the other, also served him. She just needed to find her man. In that case, he was satisfied. If they did not accept his bet, he exchanged it with the adversary. On the other hand, he was extraordinarily lucky and usually won. He was always ready and willing to gamble. You couldn't mention the smallest thing without that rogue proposing a bet for or against. It didn't matter to him, as I already told him. On horse race days he would be found at the start, flushed with joy or stripped of every penny. If there was a dog fight, he would bet. If there was a cat fight, he would bet. If there was a cock fight, he would bet. If he saw two birds perched on a branch, he would bet which one would fly first, and if there was a meeting in the field, he would be there, betting that. Pastor Walker was the best preacher in the country. And he was indeed, besides being a great person. If Smiley had seen a bed bug with its leg up to go no matter where, he would have been able to bet on how long the trip would take, and if one fell for the bet, he would have followed the bug to Mexico, never worrying about it. The distance or the time it would take to get there. There are a lot of people here who have met this Smiley and could tell you about him. He would have bet on anything, without having preferences of any kind. He was a bold guy. At one time, Pastor Walker's wife was very ill. His illness lasted a long time. They believed that he no longer had salvation. One morning the minister came in and Smiley asked him for news. The pastor replied that she was better, thanks to the infinite mercy of the Lord, and that with the blessing of providence she was doing so well that she would surely improve quickly. Smiley, without thinking about what he was saying, made his bet, that she's dead, at 2:30, he said. That Smiley had a mule the boys called the quarter-hour mare. That was no more than a joke, because surely it took her less than a quarter of an hour to make her way, and in general, he earned money with this beast even though it was so slow and although it always had asthma attacks, fatigue and other alike things. They could give him 200 to 300 meters of advantage, it would still be reached soon. But at the end of the race, he would get incredibly animated, and he would trot and gallop, kicking his legs everywhere, through the air or over the barriers, raising a tremendous cloud of dust, and making a terrible noise with his cough, and always she was first, exactly by a head. He also had a small bulldog, who seemed to be worth not 2 cents, because of his vulgar and unaggressive appearance, so much so that when betting against him, one was afraid of looking like a thief. But when the money was on the line, he became another dog. His lower jaw was beginning to bulge like the tower of a steamship, and his teeth were bared, bright as a bonfire. Another dog could run him, tease him, bite him, throw him on his back. 2 or 3 times. Andres Jackson, this was his nickname, let himself be done, always with the appearance of a dog that seems totally natural to what they do to him. Bets were doubled, tripled, against him, until there was no more money to bet. Then all of a sudden he would catch the other dog hard right on the hind leg joints, not sinking his teeth too deep, just enough to guard his prey, and hold on so long that if he hadn't thrown the sponge, he would have gone on for a year. Smiley had always won with this animal, until the day he found a dog that had no hind legs because they had been cut off by a circular saw. When the fight had gone on long enough and all the pockets had been emptied, when Andres Jackson went to bite his favorite piece, he realized that they had made fun of him, and that the other dog had him at his mercy, for that matter. Say. He looked surprised, embarrassed and cowed. He didn't make a single effort, and from that moment on, the others shook him roughly. He glanced at Smiley, who seemed to tell him that his heart was aching and that it was his fault, Smiley's, for bringing a dog that had no hind legs for him to bite, because that was the custom in a fight. Immediately afterwards he took a few steps limping, lay down and died. This Andres Jackson was a good dog. He would be famous if he lived. Because he had wood and genius. I assure you, even if circumstances have betrayed you, it would be foolish not to recognize that to fight in this way, a dog must have a special talent. I always get sad when I think about his last tournament and the way it ended. Well, that Smiley had fox terriers, fighting cocks and all kinds of animals, to the point of not having any moment of rest. Thus, when someone wanted to find no matter what, to bet against him, he was always ready. One day he caught a frog, took it home and said he was going to educate it. For 3 months he did nothing but keep her in his pen and teach her to jump, and I bet he taught her. He had only to give it a little push from behind, and immediately the frog would be seen spinning through the air like a spiral, taking a turn or two if it had taken a great push, and landing back on its legs with the dexterity of a cat. He had also taught her the art of catching flies, and had trained her so patiently on the subject that she would locate a fly on the wall at a greater distance than she could see it. Smiley said that everything he did to her A frog's lack was education, and that by educating her, you could do almost whatever you wanted with her, and I think she was right. Look, I saw him place Daniel Webster on the floor. Daniel Webster was the name of the frog, and ask him, the flies, Dan, the flies? And before you could wink, she would jump up and gobble up a fly here on the counter, bounce back to the floor like a ball of mud, and then scratch her head with one of her hind legs, with her fingers. An attitude so indifferent that it seemed that he had no idea what he had done, as if he believed that any other frog could do it. They have never seen a frog so modest and loyal, so trained as that one. And when it came to leaping over smooth ground, he could do it at any time with ease, and he would leap more space than any other animal of his kind. The long jump was his specialty. In those cases, Smiley put all his money down, betting on her, as long as he had a coin. He was barbarically proud of his frog, and he had a right to be. Yes, even people who had traveled and been everywhere, said that she would defeat all the frogs they had seen. Fine. Smiley kept his frog in a small cage, and sometimes took it with him to town, to place bets. One day, a certain individual, a stranger in our field, found him with his little cage and said to him, "What the hell is in there?" Smiley, with an indifferent expression, replied, "It could be a parrot, or a canary, but no, it's exactly a frog." The other took it, looked at it attentively, looked at it again in all directions, and then said, "It's true." "And what does he know how to do?" "I tell you," said Smiley with a careless air, "he can do one thing. He can out-jump any frog in Calaveras." The fellow took the cage again, examined it again for a long time, intently, and handed it to Smiley, saying decisively, "After all, I don't see anything better in this frog than in any other frog." "Possibly," replied Smiley. "Maybe you understand frogs, and maybe you don't. That this frog jumps a greater distance than any other frog in Calaveras." The other thought for a minute, and then said, with some regret, "Look, in this place I'm just a stranger, I don't have a frog. If I had one, I'd bet." "Very well," said Smiley, "if you'd like to look after my cage for a moment, I'll find one for you." The fellow took the cage, put his $40 next to Smiley's, and sat down to wait for Smiley to return. He was there for a long time, thinking and thinking. Then, he took the frog out of the cage, opened its mouth as wide as it could, and took a teaspoon. And immediately afterwards he dedicated himself to filling the frog with small pieces of lead, filling it up to the chin, then, he placed it on the ground, delicately. During this time Smiley, who had gone to the pond, was splashing in the mud. Finally, he caught a frog, brought it back, and gave it to the individual, saying, "Now, if you're ready, put it next to Daniel, with its front legs level with Daniel's, and I'll give the signal." Then he said, "1, 2, 3, let's jump." And Smiley and the fellow each touched his frog from behind. The new frog jumped briskly. Daniel made an effort and shrugged like this, like a Frenchman, but to no avail. She couldn't move, she was nailed to the ground as solidly as a church. I couldn't move forward, as if I was anchored. Smiley was terribly surprised, and even angry, but he couldn't guess what was going on. Surely not. The individual took the money and left. But when he got to the doorstep, he clicked his thumb over his shoulder, like this, looking cheeky, and said haughtily, "I don't see any better in this frog than in any other frog." Smiley stood for a long time, scratching his head, his eyes fixed on Daniel. Finally, he said to himself, I don't understand why this frog did not want to jump. Won't something happen to him? It looks more swollen than ever. He took Daniel by the skin of the neck, and lifted her up, exclaiming, Let him take me. Hell if it doesn't weigh 5 pounds. He turned the frog upside down, and Daniel spat out a double handful of lead. Then Smiley understood everything. He went mad with rage, and leaving the frog, he ran after the individual, but could not catch up with him. Why? At this moment Simon Wheeler heard his name called from the yard and went out to see who it was. As he left, he turned to me and said, Stay there, stranger, and don't worry, I won't take a second. But I thought, and I suppose you'll agree, that the story of witty tramp Jim Smiley probably wouldn't tell me much about the Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley. So I left. At the door I found the friendly Wheeler returning. He took me for a jacket button, and a new story began. Yes, that Smiley had a yellow cow, which was one-eyed, and had no tail, or almost no tail, just a little tail the length of a banana, But I had neither the time nor the inclination to hear the continuation of the story of the nice cow, and I said goodbye.